Great talent wins games. Great stories win hearts. How did the Golden Boy of Spain become the Premier League's £50 million cautionary tale? In red, he was electricity, the burst, the finish, the roar of Anfield. In blue, he wore a weight that numbers could not justify and injuries would not forgive. This is the rise and unraveling of Fernando Torres, the nights he shattered defenses and the nights that nearly broke him. Was he a flop or a tragic hero who still shaped history? Fernando Torres was more than just a striker. He was an icon. At Liverpool, he wasn't simply scoring goals, he was rewriting what fans thought possible. In his very first Premier League season, he netted 24 goals, a record for a foreign debutant at the time. His pace was electric, his movement instinctive, and his finishing clinical. Anfield roared his name as though he was destined to sit alongside Dalglish, Fowler, and Gerrard in Liverpool folklore. To supporters, he was the perfect blend of flair and fire, the kind of player you would pay to watch even on your worst day. And yet, just a few years later, Torres became the face of disappointment. In January 2011, Chelsea paid a British record £50 million to prize him away from Merseyside. But instead of bringing goals, the move brought ridicule. His misses became memes, his struggles turned into tabloid headlines. The man once hailed as the world's deadliest forward was suddenly a punchline across England. That is the paradox of Fernando Torres, a man who was both hero and villain, adored and mocked, remembered for glory and for failure. But is it fair to reduce his story to just that? Was Torres truly a flop, or was his career a tragic reflection of the fragility of football greatness? Because behind the headlines and the jokes lies the journey of a boy from Fuenlabrada who carried the hopes of a nation, conquered Europe, and lived through both ecstasy and despair. At its heart, the story of Fernando Torres is a battle between brilliance and burden. On one side, the dazzling striker who terrorized defenders, lifted trophies for Spain, and gave Liverpool fans hope of a new dynasty. On the other, the broken body, the £50 million price tag, and the endless scrutiny that turned admiration into mockery. That is the paradox of Fernando Torres, a man who was both hero and villain, adored and mocked, remembered for glory and for failure. But is it fair to reduce his story to just that? Was Torres truly a flop, or was his career a tragic reflection of the fragility of football greatness? Because behind the headlines and the jokes lies the journey of a boy from Fuenlabrada who carried the hopes of a nation, conquered Europe, and lived through both ecstasy and despair. At its heart, the story of Fernando Torres is a battle between brilliance and burden. On one side, the dazzling striker who terrorized defenders, lifted trophies for Spain, and gave Liverpool fans hope of a new dynasty. On the other, the broken body, the £50 million price tag, and the endless scrutiny that turned admiration into mockery. The stakes were enormous, his legacy itself. Was Torres destined to be remembered as a world champion, a Champions League hero, and one of the most gifted forwards of his generation? Or would history write him down as the Premier League's most expensive mistake? This is the untold story of Fernando Torres, a tale of talent, torment, and the thin line between immortality and infamy.
Fernando José Torres Sanz was born on March 20th, 1984 in Fuenlabrada, a working-class suburb just south of Madrid. His childhood was not one of privilege or grandeur. It was ordinary, shaped by modest surroundings and a family that valued resilience and togetherness. Football was never far from the Torres household. His grandfather, a lifelong Atlético Madrid supporter, planted the seeds of devotion early. While other children collected toys, Fernando collected memories of the Calderón. At the age of 5, he was already dribbling a ball around the small streets of his neighborhood, imagining himself in Atletico's red and white stripes. The game came naturally to him. Even before he could read or write properly, Torres was chasing the ball with unusual intensity. He wasn't the strongest child, nor the tallest, but he possessed two gifts that would later define him: an instinctive sense of movement and remarkable speed. His mother became his most loyal chauffeur, driving him across the region for training sessions, while his father quietly worked long hours to keep the family stable. For them, Fernando's dream was never just his own, it was a family mission. At just 11 years old, he was scouted and brought into Atlético Madrid's youth academy. This was no ordinary promotion. Atletico was still basking in the echoes of its rich history, yet the club was also enduring turbulent times, both financially and competitively. Amidst this uncertainty, a skinny boy with blonde hair began to stand out. Coaches recalled how he seemed to glide past opponents as if guided by instinct. His sharpness, his knack for finding space, and his almost childlike fearlessness earned him the nickname El Niño, the Kid. By his teenage years, Torres was already carrying expectations well beyond his age. For many in Madrid, he wasn't just a prospect, he was a promise. The boy from Fuenlabrada was meant to be the savior who would one day restore Atlético Madrid's pride. And the journey from boyhood dreamer to professional prodigy was about to begin.
When Torres broke into Atlético Madrid's first team in 2001, he was only 17 years old, but the weight on his shoulders was already immense. Atlético had just clawed their way back to La Liga after a stint in the second division, and supporters yearned for a new hero to restore their pride. Into that void stepped El Niño. His debut season offered glimpses of what was to come, blistering runs behind defenders, the kind of finishing that made veterans take notice, and a raw energy that electrified the Calderón. By 2002-2003, Torres had become Atletico's leading scorer, netting 13 goals in the league. The numbers may not have been astronomical, but the context was staggering. Here was a teenager not just surviving, but leading the line for one of Spain's historic clubs. Atletico's struggles only magnified his role. They weren't competing for titles, they were fighting to remain relevant. Yet Torres, with his boyish face and golden hair, embodied hope. At just 19, he was named club captain, the youngest in Atletico's history. Teammates later recalled how surreal it felt, a teenager standing in the tunnel, armband on, staring down giants of Spanish football. But Torres carried the responsibility with remarkable composure. Across Europe, scouts and pundits began to take notice. Barcelona admired his flair, Juventus tracked his progress, and Chelsea even tested Atletico's resolve with early inquiries. But Torres, loyal to the club of his childhood, resisted the allure. For him, Atletico was not just an employer, it was family. He once said, "If I ever leave, it will only be because Atletico gains from it." That loyalty cemented his bond with the fans, who worshipped him as the new symbol of their identity. By the mid-2000s, Torres was no longer just a prodigy. He was the face of Atlético Madrid. He had led them back to European competition and carried them through turbulent years when resources were scarce and expectations heavy. Yet while his reputation soared in Spain, the wider football world still wondered, could El Niño prove himself on the grandest stage? Could his talent translate against the relentless pace and physicality of the Premier League? That question would soon be answered, because Liverpool came calling, and Torres was about to take his career and his legend to an entirely new level.
In the summer of 2007, Liverpool made their move. Under Rafael Benitez, the club was searching for the missing piece. A striker who could transform possession into goals and deliver them back to the summit of English football. For £20 million, they brought Fernando Torres to Anfield. The fee was significant at the time, but what followed made it look like a bargain. Torres' impact was instant. On his Anfield debut against Chelsea, he breezed past Tal Benheim and slotted home with an elegance that made jaws drop. The cop erupted, and a love affair was born. He was fast, fearless, and ruthless. Defenders accustomed to the physical grind of the Premier League suddenly found themselves chasing shadows. That debut season, 2007 to 2008, became one of the most remarkable campaigns ever seen from a foreign newcomer. Torres scored 24 league goals, setting a new record for a debut season by a non-British player in England. Across all competitions, he netted 33. His understanding with Steven Gerrard was telepathic. Gerrard's incisive passes met Torres' darting runs, and the pair dismantled opposition defenses with almost surgical precision. It wasn't just the numbers that made Torres special, it was the manner of his goals. There was the hat trick against Middlesbrough, the blistering pace that left Nemanja Vidic stumbling time and again, the headers, the volleys, the poacher's tap-ins. Torres had every finish in his locker. He was a complete striker, one who could adapt to the chaos of the Premier League, yet bring the finesse of La Liga. The media couldn't get enough. Headlines hailed him as the most dangerous forward in Europe. Pundits debated whether he had surpassed Didier Drogba and Thierry Henry in influence. Rival fans envied him, while Liverpool supporters sang his name with a fervor not seen since the days of Robbie Fowler and Ian Rush. In 2008-2009, Torres continued to terrify defenses. Though injuries limited his appearances, his goals per game ratio remained phenomenal. He scored in iconic matches, such as the 4-1 demolition of Manchester United at Old Trafford, where his pace and finishing embarrassed the usually imperious Vidic. For Liverpool fans, it wasn't just about the goals. Torres gave them belief. For the first time in years, they dared to dream of reclaiming the league title. But perhaps the clearest sign of his breakthrough came not in club football, but on the international stage. In June 2008, Torres scored the winning goal in the European Championship final against Germany, darting past Philipp Lahm and delicately chipping Jens Lehmann. That single moment ended Spain's 44-year wait for a major trophy and signaled their golden era. For his country, Torres was no longer just El Niño. He was a national hero. By the end of his second season in England, Fernando Torres was firmly established as one of the world's best strikers. He had proven that he could thrive in the Premier League's intensity, conquer Europe with his nation, and command the respect of peers and pundits alike. But with every meteoric rise comes expectation. And as the pressure mounted, cracks began to appear. By the close of the 2008-09 season, Fernando Torres had carved out a reputation not just as Liverpool's talisman, but as arguably the most feared striker in the world. He was no longer El Niño in the sense of a boy wonder. He had grown into a force of nature. Defenders dreaded his name appearing on the team sheet. Analysts compared him to legends of the past. Supporters, whether Spanish or English, believed they were witnessing the prime years of a generational talent. His second season in England confirmed his extraordinary efficiency. Though plagued by injuries that limited him to 24 league appearances, Torres still scored 14 goals. More importantly, he had developed an uncanny partnership with Steven Gerrard. The pair played as though wired together, Gerrard exploiting the pockets of space between midfield and defense, Torres timing his runs to perfection. The chemistry was so potent that commentators began referring to them as the most devastating duo in European football. The 2008-09 campaign also saw Liverpool mount a serious title challenge under Rafa Benitez. Torres delivered crucial strikes, none more iconic than his performance at Old Trafford in March 2009. Coming up against Manchester United, Liverpool needed a statement win. Torres provided it. Exploiting his pace and aggression, he forced Nemanja Vidic, one of the era's most formidable defenders, into mistake after mistake. His equalizing goal and relentless pressing set the tone for a 4-1 demolition. For United's faithful, it was humiliation. For Liverpool, it was vindication. Torres had outclassed the champions in their own fortress. Internationally, his stature grew even further. After delivering Spain's decisive goal at Euro 2008, Torres cemented himself as one of the leaders of a golden generation. In the years that followed, Spain dominated world football, and Torres stood shoulder to shoulder with Xavi, Iniesta, Villa, and Casillas. Though not always the most prolific at international level, his knack for big moments made him indispensable. In 2010, even as injuries began to affect his sharpness, he was part of the squad that conquered the World Cup in South Africa, making Spain the undisputed kings of world football. The style of Torres at his peak was unique. He wasn't a battering ram in the mold of Drogba, nor was he purely a poacher like Inzaghi. Torres combined the blistering acceleration of Henry with the clinical edge of Michael Owen and the elegance of a continental finisher. His runs were devastating, angled diagonals that split backlines apart. His first touch often created his own shooting chance, and his composure in front of goal was icy. He thrived in transition, a weapon of destruction whenever Liverpool won the ball back. What elevated Torres further was the aura he carried. He looked like a superstar, with his blonde hair and youthful face, yet his demeanor remained grounded. He wasn't arrogant in interviews, nor did he thrive on controversy. Fans felt he was one of them, a humble kid living the dream. At Anfield, they idolized him. Songs like Fernando Torres, Liverpool's number 9, became anthems of joy. By 2009-10, however, clouds began to gather. Torres remained lethal, scoring 18 goals in just 22 league starts, but his body was beginning to betray him. Persistent hamstring and knee problems meant Liverpool couldn't always rely on his availability. Still, when fit, he was unstoppable. Statistically, his goals per game ratio remained among the best in Europe, rivaling Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. The contradiction of Torres' peak years is this. Individually, he was magnificent. Collectively, his teams fell short. Liverpool, though coming close in 2009, never captured the Premier League title. Spain, though victorious, often leaned on others during Torres' less healthy spells. For all his brilliance, fortune seemed to deny him prolonged glory at the very top. And yet, the image of Torres in those red years, charging through defenses, fists pumping in front of the cop, remains immortal. He was a footballer who embodied both artistry and aggression, an athlete who turned matches into events. His peak was breathtaking, the kind that convinces fans they are witnessing history. But as with all peaks, the descent was inevitable. Injuries mounted, Liverpool faltered, and in January 2011, Torres made a decision that would alter his legacy forever. He left Anfield for Chelsea in a record-breaking £50 million deal. It was supposed to be the move that secured his place among the greats. Instead, it became the beginning of his undoing.
On January 31st, 2011, the Premier League transfer window closed with one of the most shocking moves in football history. Fernando Torres, Liverpool's beloved number 9, crossed the divide to join Chelsea for a British record fee of £50 million. For Liverpool fans, it was heartbreak. For Chelsea supporters, it was hope. But for Torres himself, it was the beginning of the most difficult chapter of his career. The deal was meant to symbolize Chelsea's ambition, a marquee signing to fire them to further glory. Yet almost immediately, the weight of expectation bore down. The price tag became a curse. Every touch, every miss, every moment was scrutinized. His debut against former club Liverpool was surreal. Torres in blue against the very fans who had adored him just days earlier. Chelsea lost 1-0, and his performance was muted, foreshadowing the struggles to come. The root of his decline was not simply psychological. Years of relentless football had taken a toll on his body. Persistent knee and hamstring injuries robbed him of his greatest weapon, explosive pace. The Fernando Torres who once left Nemanja Vidic in ruins at Old Trafford was no longer there. Without that burst, he became a shadow of the striker he once was. The press turned merciless. Each barren run without a goal fueled headlines mocking his fall from grace. The infamous open goal miss against Manchester United in 2011 became a meme before memes were even mainstream. Tabloids branded him the £50 million flop. The same player who had been the Premier League's most feared striker just 2 years earlier was now a punchline. And yet, even in the depths of decline, Torres still produced moments of unforgettable brilliance. The most iconic came in April 2012 at the Camp Nou. In the Champions League semi-final, with Chelsea under siege against Barcelona, Torres came off the bench. In stoppage time, he latched onto a clearance, surged past the last defender, rounded Victor Valdez, and calmly rolled the ball into the empty net. The goal sealed Chelsea's place in the final, and commentators screamed, "Fernando Torres has put Chelsea in the Champions League final."
It was redemption, however brief. Just weeks later, Chelsea lifted the Champions League trophy in Munich. Torres may not have been the driving force of that triumph, but his contribution in Barcelona was immortal. A year later, he added the Europa League to his collection, scoring in the final against Benfica. But these peaks were fleeting. The consistency never returned. His Chelsea record, 20 league goals in 4 years, told the story. By 2014, he was loaned out to AC Milan and eventually returns to Atlético Madrid, the club where it all began. The tragedy of this chapter was not that Torres became an average striker, but that he had once soared so high. Fans remembered the lightning runs, the ruthless finishes, the fearless boy from Fuenlabrada. At Chelsea, they saw flashes, not flames. It was not failure alone, it was the slow erosion of greatness in real time. For many, this period cemented Torres as a flop, but those who looked deeper understood it differently. His struggles were not of will or effort. They were the cruel toll of injuries and the crushing burden of expectation. In truth, Torres' Chelsea years were not just about decline, they were about resilience, about finding moments of light even in the shadows. And in the end, those fleeting moments, especially that night at Camp Nou, ensured that his story could never be reduced to mockery alone.
Fernando Torres' legacy is one of contradictions, yet it is precisely that complexity which makes him unforgettable. At Liverpool, he is immortalized as the idol who rekindled hope and gave fans memories of brilliance they still cherish. At Chelsea, he is remembered less for the goals he scored than for the one that changed everything, the solo run at the Camp Nou that carried them to the Champions League final. For Spain, Torres stands as a pillar of their golden generation. His winner at Euro 2008 ended decades of frustration and began an era of dominance. He lifted the World Cup in 2010, scored again in the Euro 2012 final, and became one of the few players in history to win Europe's 3 greatest prizes: Euro, World Cup, and Champions League. Yet beyond the medals and statistics lies something deeper. Torres represents the fragility of sporting greatness. He showed how quickly a hero can become a scapegoat, how injuries and pressure can alter the course of a career. And yet he also showed resilience, never giving up, always fighting, and still delivering on the grandest stages when it mattered most. In the end, Torres is neither just a legend nor merely a flop. He is both, and that duality is what makes his story timeless. He remains El Niño, the boy who captured hearts, stumbled, but still left an indelible mark on football history. Great talent wins games. Great stories win hearts. Fernando Torres' journey reminds us that football is not just about statistics or trophies, it's about the emotions, the highs and lows, the humanity behind the player. If his story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more untold stories of Premier League legends. And stay tuned, because next time, we'll uncover another icon whose glory and heartbreak defined an era of English football.